Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the Whitmore family's imposing mansion, perched high in the hills of New York City, John Whitmore savored his empire. A feared businessman and respected patriarch, he had built his fortune on charisma, intelligence, and the silence of others. But behind his smiles and lavish dinners hid a man willing to do anything to protect his reputation. This time, the tribunal was his greatest challenge. Charges of massive fraud and corruption threatened to expose decades of manipulation. John, confident in himself, had already set his plan in motion: bribe every witness, buy every silence, twist the truth to suit his purposes. Justice, he believed, was nothing more than a game of power and money. But he was unaware of one crucial detail. Emily, his stepdaughter, had grown up in the shadow of his authority but with an impeccable conscience. A law graduate with a keen sense of justice, she watched silently, gathering evidence and secrets. Her love for her family mingled with her outrage at John's manipulations. What was supposed to be an easy trial for John would soon turn into a trap from which he would not emerge unscathed. For in the shadow of her power, a young woman determined to defend the truth was preparing to risk everything to denounce injustice. And when she spoke, all the bribed witnesses would tremble, and the Whitmore patriarch would finally understand that some battles aren't won with money. The sun was barely rising over Manhattan when John Whitmore walked through the doors of his glass-enclosed office, overlooking the city skyline. The skyscrapers glittered like jewels, but to John, nothing was more precious than the power he held within those walls. Every decision, every contract, every contrived smile was part of a game he had mastered for decades. Today, however, an unusual tension hung in the air. The trial that threatened to discredit him and ruin his empire was fast approaching. Yet John had taken every precaution. Witnesses had been quietly persuaded to change their testimonies, incriminating evidence had disappeared or been replaced, and his most skillful lawyers had ensured that nothing could touch him. Sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, John leafed through the court files with a cold smile. To him, justice was merely a minor obstacle, easily circumvented. "Money solves everything," he muttered to himself, pushing the pen away and gazing out the window at the streets below. Passers-by had no idea that above them, a man had just transformed the justice system into a mere game of Monopoly. But in the shadows of her glass fortress, a figure moved cautiously. Emily Whitmore, her daughter-in-law, watched from the adjacent library. Her hands were clutched around a folder filled with evidence she had painstakingly collected over the past weeks. Every receipt, every discreet exchange, every silent threat had been documented. She knew the time to act was now, but she had to be strategic. One false step and all could be lost. That morning, the Whitmore patriarch thought he was invincible. But Emily, with her determination and righteousness, was about to show him that true power cannot be bought. The battle for justice had only just begun. And in this duel of cunning and courage, every gesture, every word, every decision would carry weight. Emily Whitmore had never been one to be intimidated. Since childhood, she had learned to observe, to listen, and above all, to distinguish between fact and fiction. The death of her mother, John's wife, had left her with a mixture of grief and insight. She now knew the man behind the polite smiles and lavish dinners. Sitting in the small office she'd set up in the east wing of the mansion, Emily once again went through the documents she'd accumulated. Receipts, coded messages, copies of bank transfers, witness statements recorded without John's knowledge, it was all there. Each piece of evidence was a crack in the wall of lies John had built. She knew that taking on him would be dangerous. John Whitmore wasn't just her stepfather, he was a master manipulator, capable of destroying the reputation and life of anyone who dared to oppose him. Yet Emily was driven by a conviction stronger than fear: justice must prevail, and she was willing to risk everything for it. That day, she discreetly contacted a former colleague at the bar, Michael Carter, a lawyer renowned for his integrity and courage. "Michael, I need your help," she whispered into the phone. "My stepfather bribed the witnesses at the trial. If no one talks, he'll get away with it. But I have the evidence. I want justice." Meanwhile, John, unaware that his corrupt empire was beginning to crack, received daily praise from his colleagues. Every smile, every handshake, every compliment was a carefully orchestrated illusion. But Emily watched patiently, ready to strike when he thought himself most invincible. As the sun set over Manhattan, illuminating the glass facades of the skyscrapers, Emily made a decision. She would not be content to let the truth be lost in the halls of justice. She would become the catalyst for John Whitmore's downfall. And when that time came, bribed witnesses, accomplices, and even John himself would discover that courage and integrity cannot be bought. Emily knew she had to proceed cautiously. Every move had to be calculated, every piece of evidence safeguarded. She spent the morning reviewing suspicious bank transfers, coded messages, and the testimonies of witnesses she had been able to surreptitiously approach. Every document, every file, every note was a piece of a puzzle that, when put together, could destroy John Whitmore's empire. She decided to meet first with one of John's key witnesses, a former associate of John's, Marcus Reynolds. Marcus, a nervous and easily impressionable man, had been paid to testify on John's behalf at the trial. But Emily had gained his trust. In a small, discreet Manhattan cafe, she spoke to him calmly and firmly. "Marcus, I know you were paid to lie in court. You risk a lot if you continue to remain silent. But it's never too late to tell the truth. I can protect you and guarantee that you won't be punished for your past role, provided you give me all the information you have." Marcus, trembling, looked at Emily hesitantly. You think I can really?" he whispered. Emily simply nodded, her gaze determined. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, in his glass-fronted office, John Whitmore was beginning to see faint warning signs. A few witnesses seemed hesitant, rumors were circulating about missing documents, and one of his most trusted associates had exhibited unusually nervous behavior. "Something's wrong," he murmured, frowning. But, true to form, he refused to panic. "Emily's just a child in this adult game," he reassured himself, unaware that beneath his facade of calm, the tide was beginning to turn. That evening, Emily returned to the manor, her heart pounding but determined. She knew that every step brought her closer to her goal, but she also knew that John wouldn't give in without fighting back. Every move he made could set off a chain reaction. Yet she was ready. Because in this game of power and lies, she was now the one who held the real power, the truth. And as night fell over Manhattan, a chill ran through the halls of the Whitmore mansion. The game had just begun. For several weeks, a silent game had been playing out between Emily and John Whitmore. Every gesture, every word, every glance became an invisible battlefield. John thought he had every situation under control, but he sensed something unusual was brewing in the shadows. Emily, for her part, moved cautiously, aware that the slightest mistake could ruin everything. That morning, John summoned Emily to his office. He wanted to test her reaction, gauge her boldness. "Emily, I hear you've been spending a lot of time with Marcus Reynolds," he began, a cold smile on his lips. "You know I protect this family, and any threat against me will be problematic, right?" Emily raised her head, her expression calm but resolute. "I'm not threatening anyone, John. I simply want the truth to come out. If justice isn't served, no one is safe, not even you." The patriarch frowned, surprised by his daughter-in-law's courage and confidence. "The truth," he repeated, his voice low, almost threatening. "You don't know what you're talking about. In this world, money and power are the only truth that matters." Emily didn't flinch. "Perhaps. But the moral truth, the one you've ignored your whole life, will always catch up with you eventually." This confrontation, though brief, made John waver. He knew Emily posed a real threat, but he refused to show weakness. He returned to his desk, his jaw clenched, while Emily left the room, her heart pounding but determined. In the days that followed, Emily intensified her efforts. She discreetly contacted other witnesses, cross-checking every piece of information, recording every detail. For his part, John multiplied his attempts to intimidate those who might speak out. The tensions in the mansion were palpable, the staff watched, some worried, others fascinated by the silent battle unfolding between the patriarch and his daughter-in-law. The psychological duel was on. John used his experience, his authority, and his reputation. Emily had courage, logic, and irrefutable evidence. In this battle of wills, there could be no safe allies or escape routes. Every word exchanged became a piece in a dangerous game, where the winner would dictate the future of the Whitmore family and fortune. And in the midst of this conflict, a shiver of disquiet ran through the halls of the manor. For the first time, John Whitmore was beginning to feel that his empire, built on lies and manipulation, could collapse. Emily knew that for justice to prevail, she had to get to the heart of John's corruption scheme, the witnesses. Among them was the one who could change everything, Marcus Reynolds. If she could convince him to talk, the trial would take a completely different turn. One rainy morning, she met Marcus in a small cafe in Tribeca. The hubbub of customers and the scent of roasting coffee provided perfect camouflage for their conversation. Marcus was nervous, his eyes shifting. He knew that speaking out could put his career, and his safety, at risk. "Marcus," Emily began, her voice firm but reassuring, "I'm not here to threaten you. I want you to be free to do what's right. Everything you say will be legally protected. But if you continue to lie, you risk much more than you realize." Marcus's gaze flickered between fear and hope. I don't know if I can," he whispered. Emily placed a hand on his. "You can. And you must. Think of all the people who have suffered because of his manipulations. You now have the power to undo some of that harm." After a long silence, Marcus nodded, trembling but resolute. "Okay. I'll talk. Everything I know, everything I've seen. It's time for this to stop." Meanwhile, John Whitmore, in his office, was beginning to feel shivers of worry. He was already hearing whispers of hesitant witnesses. He sensed something unusual was going on, but he refused to panic. His confidence, built on decades of manipulation, was wavering for the first time. Emily left the cafe with a mixture of apprehension and satisfaction. She knew this was only a first victory, but it was a crucial step. Marcus would testify, and soon, the foundations on which John had built his corrupt empire would begin to crumble. That night, as she returned to the manor, Emily felt a renewed energy. Every piece of evidence she possessed, every witness she secured, brought the truth closer to its rightful place. And in the shadows of the grandeur of Whitmore Manor, a silent but relentless battle continued, ready to burst into the open. News of Marcus Reynolds's change spread quickly, almost imperceptibly, but suffocatingly for John Whitmore. The man who had long been his staunch ally had just betrayed the silent code of his empire. That initial tremor triggered a series of unexpected reactions. In his glass-walled office, John pored over financial and legal reports with a growing sense of tension. Every colleague suddenly seemed more nervous, every assistant more hesitant. The murmurs of the mansion's employees reached his ears like an ominous echo. Some had begun to doubt, others to consider their own safety. Emily, for her part, continued her methodical work. She discreetly contacted other key witnesses, assuring them of protection and anonymity. The effect was immediate. One by one, John's accomplices began to turn away from him, fearing the legal consequences and the power of an unrelenting truth. The falsified documents were discovered, the hidden recordings surfaced, and the chains of corruption began to break. One evening, as John returned late from the city, he found his mansion eerily silent. His employees, accustomed to blind obedience, were now cautious, avoiding his gaze. Even his loyal secretary, who had never betrayed him, seemed hesitant. A chill ran down his spine. The first crack in his control had just transformed into an ominous chasm. Emily watched from afar, aware that fear was beginning to settle in John's heart. Each potential traitor added another piece to the puzzle of truth she was piecing together. The battle was no longer just a legal one, it was becoming a psychological one, one in which John was no longer in absolute control. And as night enveloped Manhattan, the Whitmore mansion, once a symbol of power and invincibility, now echoed with the beginnings of its master's imminent fall. Allies turned away, evidence mounted, and Emily, silent but relentless, moved inexorably toward justice. John Whitmore felt the pressure rise like a relentless wave. His accomplices were beginning to turn away, the witnesses were hesitating, and Emily, the young woman he had always underestimated, was advancing with a determination that infuriated him. He decided it was time to act directly. One afternoon, in the oak-walled study, John summoned Emily. His gaze, usually so confident, betrayed a glint of frustration. "Emily," he said coldly, "you're playing a dangerous game. I propose a compromise: abandon this crusade against me, and I'll make sure you never want for anything." Emily looked at him calmly, without trembling. "Compromise?" she repeated, her voice firm. "You talk about your empire built on lies and manipulation. I want nothing from you, John. I simply want justice." John slammed his fist on his desk, startling Emily. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Everything you own here could disappear in an instant." Emily, impassive, took out a sheaf of carefully arranged documents. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And that's why I've taken every precaution. This evidence isn't just for me, it's in good hands. I've contacted Michael Carter, a lawyer specializing in corruption and fraud cases. Everything you've tried to hide will be revealed, and this time, no one will be able to protect you." A heavy silence filled the room. John, accustomed to his threats being enough, felt his empire tremble for the first time. The documents Emily held, the evidence he had accumulated, his daughter-in-law's indomitable conviction, all of it formed a storm he couldn't control. Emily left the office, her heart pounding but her step steady. For John, every second that passed brought his fall closer. The silent war he thought he had under control was now becoming a precipice he could not avoid. Inside the Whitmore mansion, a new tension hung in the air. The patriarch, once master of all, felt fear settle where he had never known anything but obedience and respect. And Emily, silent but invincible, advanced towards victory, evidence by evidence, witness by witness. The day of the trial finally arrived. The usually calm Manhattan courthouse was now the scene of palpable tension. Reporters milled around, passers-by peered from behind the glass, and witnesses, once mute under John Whitmore's pressure and money, now stepped forward with courage. Emily, sitting in the front row, watched each of the witnesses enter the room. Marcus Reynolds was the first. His gaze, once shifty, was now steady. He recounted in detail how John had bribed several witnesses, manipulated evidence, and exerted illegal pressure. Each word fell like a hammer blow on the edifice of lies John had constructed. The other witnesses, inspired by Marcus's courage and protected by the legal safeguards put in place by Emily and her lawyer Michael Carter, followed suit. The documents, the falsified financial statements, the coded messages, all were presented as irrefutable evidence. John's normally impassive face slowly fell. The prosecution lawyer, fully prepared with the information Emily had provided, laid out the facts with precision and conviction. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the web of corruption was revealed. John tried to retort, to minimize his actions, but every argument crumbled before the concrete evidence and the courageous testimony of his former accomplices. After several hours, the judge stood up, his expression grave. "John Whitmore," he declared solemnly, "you are found guilty of fraud, intimidation, and bribery. The law cannot tolerate such abuses, and you will be judged accordingly." A heavy silence filled the room. John, once all-powerful, felt his world crumble. The eyes of the witnesses, the audience, and especially Emily were fixed on him. He had lost his fortune, his authority, and above all, the control he believed would last forever. Emily, though relieved, remained silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the scene. She knew this victory was not just for her, but for all those who had been victims of manipulation and corruption. Justice had prevailed, and John Whitmore had finally paid for his crimes. As the patriarch was escorted from the room, humility and defeat written all over his face, Emily understood that the battle for truth was sometimes long and perilous, but that with courage and determination, it could triumph. After John Whitmore's fall, the manor, once filled with shadows and secrets, seemed eerily silent. The walls that had long echoed with the patriarch's imperious commands now held the quiet breathing of a house under reconstruction. Emily knew that victory in court was only the beginning. The family's wounds needed to be healed and the dignity John had trampled upon restored. She spent her days meeting with family members and former associates, listening to their fears, regrets, and frustrations. For some, the truth had come as a brutal shock, for others, a relief. Emily, patiently and firmly, showed them that justice was not just about conviction, but also about accountability and redemption. Relationships with family members, once marked by fear and manipulation, began to rebuild. John's children, long influenced by his authority and charisma, saw Emily not only as a daughter-in-law, but as a moral guide, capable of restoring balance and loyalty within the family. She also took the time to thank the courageous witnesses and collaborators who had dared to speak out. Every testimony, every piece of evidence provided, had been crucial. Emily understood that true courage lay not only in personal action, but in inspiring others to act with integrity. And as the first rays of sunlight lit Manhattan, Emily, standing on the mansion's balcony, felt a new peace wash over her. She had not only helped bring justice, but she had also shown that truth and courage could triumph even against the most powerful of men. In his mind, one certainty became clear: justice, morality, and determination are forces that, when united, cannot be broken. John Whitmore had fallen, but the lesson Emily had taught would remain etched far beyond the walls of the Whitmore family. Within months of John Whitmore's conviction, Emily Whitmore had transformed the mansion into a place of rebuilding and inspiration. The family's wounds were beginning to heal, but Emily knew the real victory lay in the lasting impact she could create beyond the walls of the house. Determined to give greater meaning to her fight, Emily founded an organization dedicated to fighting corruption and protecting victims of manipulation and fraud. She worked tirelessly to raise public awareness, provide free legal assistance, and create a support network for those who, like her, believed in justice. Every day, she met young lawyers, courageous witnesses, and victims seeking justice. Her experience with John Whitmore became a living example, showing that courage, integrity, and perseverance could triumph even against the most powerful adversaries. In the Whitmore mansion, the hallways now echoed with laughter, heartfelt conversations, and plans for the future. John's former colleagues, once silent out of fear or self-interest, were now participating in positive initiatives, encouraged by Emily's example. One evening, Emily stood on the balcony, looking out at the twinkling lights of Manhattan. The city seemed to vibrate with a new energy, as if each victory for the truth resonated beyond the courtrooms and mansions. She smiled, knowing that her fight wasn't just a legal battle, but a legacy she would leave behind. John Whitmore's fall had been spectacular, but more than that, it had allowed Emily to demonstrate that justice does not depend on wealth or power. It depends on the determination and courage of those who dare to stand up for what is right. And so, Emily Whitmore became not only a talented lawyer, but also a symbol of resilience, integrity, and morality, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come.